But it's more, to me, gardening is more an act of actually physically being out there in the soil versus what you produce. It's the act of returning to the earth and slowing down and pausing and taking that moment, that beat for yourself to take a deep breath and be outdoors. That's the magic of gardening, I think.
Hey friend, welcome to the Growing Kindness Podcast. I'm your host, Deanna Kitchen, founder of the Growing Kindness Movement. This is a place where we grow together, learning to root our lives in kindness, connection, and community. If you've ever wished the world felt a little softer, a little more neighborly, or if you're craving stories that remind you that goodness still grows, you're in the right place. Together with our guests, we'll share stories of generosity and community, proof that even the smallest acts of kindness, from growing and giving cut flowers to everyday acts of care, can change lives and connect us in powerful ways. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started. This season is made possible by Heirloom Roses, our Season 2 sponsor. We're deeply grateful for their generosity that helps carry the Growing Kindness mission forward and makes these stories possible. Welcome back to the podcast. I am so glad you're here with us today. I know today's conversation is just going to be a place of encouragement and just a really cool opportunity for learning more about how our gardens can serve us as a tool in self-care and wellness. I'm thrilled to welcome Elizabeth Brown today. Elizabeth is the author of The Beginner's Cut Flower Garden and is also a therapeutic horticulturist. So I'm really excited to dig in and learn more about this role, especially today, and get to dive into all things flowers and wellness and connection and how they all go together so beautifully. Elizabeth, welcome. Thank you for being here with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and talk with you. I'm sure you know you didn't mention the beginning, but I was a Growing Kindness ambassador, and that was so important to my early journey in growing flowers. Going through that program and learning to grow dahlias really built my confidence and helped me to realize how much I loved growing and gifting flowers. So I have you to thank for that in the program. So that's wonderful.
Oh my goodness. That's incredible that tie back. And thank you for sharing that with us all. And one of those things I remembered that that's kind of where our stories, our paths first crossed and we were connected. So that was way back in 21, 22?
I think so. I think it was kind of right after everyone was sort of poking their heads out from the pandemic, but it was still happening. So it was a really sort of, as we all remember, up and down time. And so for me, growing flowers was really helpful during that process, which I think is how truly I stumbled upon Growing Kindness, because we were all just at home, right? I was at home, sort of like, what do I do with my children? What do I do with my spare time? I think probably through social media, I found out about it and thought, oh, this, I really want to do this. I had gotten back into gardening and tending some of the perennials that were long neglected in my yard. But I really didn't know much about seasonal cut flowers. And so that the classes that I took through the program really gave me the confidence to go out and try growing things.
That's amazing. I guess I didn't fully realize that your flower growing journey began with Growing Kindness. So that really, you've made tremendous growth that was only four or 5 years ago. That's incredible.
Yeah.
So really, I was going to ask you kind of what was happening in your life when you first started growing flowers, but this was it. You were in the thick of the pandemic, figuring out what mothering and as home educating your children looked like in that time, figuring out what self-care looked like in that time. That's really incredible that the beginning of your story starts there. I love that.
Yeah, it was, it started really small. And so I think when I talk to people about growing cut flowers, that's one of the things that I say is that in a really small bed, you can grow so many flowers of certain types that we call cut and come again blooms, like dahlias being, of course, a great one for it. So you don't have to start by tearing up your whole backyard. And I definitely did not. I started with tiny raised bed, then long rows. And then to add to the conversation, what sort of happened was I ended up suddenly losing my father during the period of growing flowers and the pandemic. And I would jokingly call my garden my grief garden. And I just started growing flowers and kept my head in the soil. And it was sort of the space I went to privately mourn and remind myself of the beauty in the world and the beauty of the community I lived in. And so a lot of the first flowers we gifted were for people in our community who had, been help to my dad along the years and our family, because we grow up in a very small knit community that I live in now with my own family. So anyone who has lived in a small tight knit town, I'm sure that resonates with you, that you know everyone, right? You know the postman, you know all the teachers, you know all the doctors, you know all the people in town. And so the garden became a space for me to really celebrate the beauty of community and all the people who I had grown up with throughout the years, who had been a great support to me. So that was sort of the real feel-good message behind the garden. But then the other thing that happened was people started noticing I was growing cut flowers. And we live in a very seasonal town in Maine that hosts a lot of weddings. So all of a sudden, these really wonderful local florists started reaching out to me saying, "Hey, I noticed you were growing X dahlia and I need this color," or "Would you be interested in growing this?" And so pretty quickly I was able to create a direct channel to florists who are looking for certain types of flowers that I was willing to grow or trial, and that they found would be reliable because they knew where I lived. They could just knock on my door and say, "Hey, can I pick 5 of the Cornell Brown dahlias while you're eating dinner?" "Sure, here's some sniffs." So it became a very sort of community-oriented, enormous cut flower garden, I would say.
Amazing. Okay, so just from the gardener perspective now, I'm sure I'm not the only one dying to hear. Tell us more about what your garden looks like now, having started with a single raised bed, but, 6, is it really? In some ways, isn't it a time warp? Like when we think, oh, COVID was 6 years ago, which
I
it
have
feels
no
like
idea.
yesterday and forever ago
Yes.
in the same breath.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Completely agree.
that's quite a journey. I'd
Yeah.
love to hear more about what your garden looks like now.
Yeah. So we live in, like I said, a really small town in coastal Maine, and I live in an old farmhouse, which I think is part of why things are so successful, because the soil here has to be great, and the plot of land is all aligned perfectly with the sun. So I definitely had some help in that regard with just the landscape. We have a perennial garden. I've always been a gardener, I would say. Ever since I was a kid, we had flowers and veggies and all sorts of things. So it started with tending to the perennial garden, throwing in a few seeds, seeing what might be able to work as cut flowers. And then that feeling of, well, I want to cut some things, but I want to keep some things here. So creating designated beds as cut flowers. And so now what that looks like is we have sort of our family garden, which is the perennial garden right off the kitchen. And if ever I try to cut flowers from there, my husband's usually knocking out the window like, "No, this is not the commercial garden.
Leave those ones
This is the family
alone."
garden." And then beyond that, I have probably 20 rows of 3 by anywhere from 15 to 20 where I grow cut flowers there. Some of the beds last year, about a quarter of them over the past 2 years, I've been turning over to more native flowers and kind of experimenting with what would work well as a native plant that would be good as a cut flower. And no shocker, a lot of them do, because they are hardy blooms that have wonderful vase life. So a lot of the garden is experimenting. And this year, as I've shifted more toward writing and promoting the book, I'm sticking with the classics, right? Like cosmos, zinnias, dahlias, things that are super easy to grow, and also still experimenting with different types of perennials. So something that kind of keeps my mind interested in the big science experiment that is the garden.
I love that we all bring our personalities into the garden, right? I think that there are those of us who are, that kind of type B, like, let's just throw some things in the ground and then move them around and see what happens. And the joy of waiting to see what's going to come, is so rewarding. And then there's those of us that bring like a type A personality. We're like, this is a great big science experiment. It brings me tremendous joy, to watch cause and effect and see what the data, looks like, and trial things and experiment. And it's so lovely that gardening welcomes us all into that space and meets that need in us all, wherever it is that we're coming to gardening from.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I always think too, as far as, type of personality, but you're saying, but also your general interests. So if you are someone who's interested in experimenting for scientific purposes, it can be an incubator for that. Or if you're someone who's a creative and you want to grow flowers for natural dyes or drying, or you're intrigued by flowers for teas or medicinal or edible, any sort of interest you have can be held in a garden. And so a lot of what I talk to folks about is finding what garden works for them, finding what brings them joy in their day-to-day life. Of course, we can all look at what other people are growing, and that's really helpful. But sort of figuring out, how is my garden going to nourish me and my creativity and my interests, and by extension, my family and my community? All those are really big questions that make a garden uniquely yours when you answer them.
I love that so much. I think that it's beautiful and inspiring to see how much attention has come back to growing cut flowers, and how many resources there are, and how many thousands of people there are out there doing it in their own way and sharing that story on social media. And in the same breath, I think it creates a unspoken sense of expectation. This is the way to do it, or this is what success looks like in gardening. And I love those questions that you ask, because I think we can really quickly get down a rabbit trail of comparison or expectation, either that we're putting on ourselves, so that we maybe feel from others about what our garden could or should be. And in that process, it ceases to be what we actually started it for in the beginning, or what we need most from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. And this reminds me, I had a friend recently who we had befriended each other on social media. She loved gardening as well. So the first time she came over to my garden, she sort of said later, "Oh, I was so relieved that you had weeds, and that you were sort of walking around saying, this didn't take, and I thought this would do better, but nah." She said, from the images on social media, it seemed like your garden was going to be so perfect and curated, and it isn't. It can be certain times of day, or a given week in the season when I've weeded and the sunlight is hitting it just right. It's stunning. But there are many times I walk out there and think, what is happening out here? But but it's more, to me, gardening is more an act of actually physically being out there in the soil versus what you produce. It's the act of returning to the earth and slowing down and pausing and taking that moment, that beat for yourself to take a deep breath and be outdoors. That's the magic of gardening, I think.
Absolutely. Well, that leads me to asking, because I'm dying to know more about your work as a therapeutic horticulturist. What a journey, you've been on, and it's brought you to this and to becoming an author now, and inspiring and encouraging others, and being able to get out and grow cut flowers. Can you share more about what a therapeutic horticulturist does, and how you came to that role in your life?
So yeah, it's really interesting. So therapeutic horticulture is something that I think we intrinsically all understand. We all know we feel better in the garden. And beyond that, there's plenty of scientific studies that show it's better for you. That's why they have gardens in hospitals. There was actually a really wonderful study done on nurses during the COVID pandemic, where they had some nurses just take their regular snack break or breaks within the hospital, and then others who took those breaks sort of out in a green space. And, of course, though, we know, right, the nurses who took the breaks in the green space, their stress levels were more reduced. So we seem to understand that being in the garden and being green spaces is good for our health, and that, at least in the United States, it's not something that's very often integrated into either how we design our own home garden or different treatment modalities for people. My background is in healthcare. I'm an audiologist, so I work with patients who have hearing loss. And so my mind is always leaning toward this really science-based, but why? And where's the data to prove it? And I think my own personal experience as someone who has dealt with anxiety and depression most of my life, I couldn't wrap my head around why during the absolute sadness and chaos of the pandemic, why I was feeling okay. And the only thing I could point to was the amount of time I was spending in the garden. Because besides that, nothing had really changed, I had my same therapist. I was doing all these same wellness things. I was meditating still. I was doing all these different things that I had always done. But suddenly I felt markedly better. And it became really obvious to me it was because of the time I spent in the garden. And when I began researching it, I found out, there's all this science to prove it. And that's when I learned about, the therapeutic uses of horticulture. So there are sort of two avenues of studies in the US. One is therapeutic horticulture, and to be completely confusing, the other one is horticulture therapy. And the latter is very much more clinical in nature. And so what I mean by that is someone with horticulture therapy has a little bit more training. They do usually a year of sort of guided hours overseen. And then oftentimes these are people like physical therapists or people who work within hospital settings who are working this into a clinical plan for an individual patient where it's a measurable clinical thing. Therapeutic horticulture, I would say, is a little more freewheeling in that you still have to go through training. So I did that at the University of North Carolina. It was a 2-year program. But it's more meant to impact bigger, broader groups of people and be more group focused versus individually patient goal focused. So that might look like going into a senior center and sitting with people and helping them make pressed flowers cards. It might look like going into a school and helping them design a sensory garden and leading children in meditation where you're not singling out individual people, but you have this general goal for the betterment of a group. And so that was something that I really liked the idea of because I wanted to mostly learn how this could impact the home gardener. If we approached your garden by looking at it as a spot for healing, how would we change what we're planting in our garden? What if I sat down and asked you, what's your day-to-day life like? What would you like to see changed? Are you someone who's stressed? What if we put things in the garden that smell really nice? And what if we have that conversation where there's all sorts of different herbs in front of you and you put your nose to them and we kind of measure, how does that feel while you're experiencing the smell of lavender? And would growing that and cutting it and bringing it into your home be really meaningful to you? So those are the ways I see it interacting in my practice as a gardener and planning gardens with folks, sort of looking at the garden beyond, this is a pretty cosmo and it'll look lovely in a vase, and more about the overall general well-being that you can derive from a garden.
I feel like I have tears in my eyes right now. And I think it's just because I feel like you just named really kind of at the heart of what growing kindness was always, I've never put the word, therapeutic horticulture on it, but really that was always our hope, is that we could help people by getting them out into the garden. And then the second layer of helping people to build connections for themselves, but also strengthen their communities by giving flowers. But personally, for me, I wish I could have had your voice and your book and your wisdom in my life. I would say it would probably been about 16 years ago, because I knew that gardening was something that was nourishing me, but I felt this tremendous amount of pressure that it needed to produce. It needed to earn money. And maybe on a deeper level, like I needed to prove myself, like I'm good at this. And maybe it's just me, maybe just my personality, and that I felt that kind of external pressure of, like if you're really doing something worthwhile and you're really good at it, you can turn it into a business. When really what my heart needed all along was that my garden could be a place for healing and rest and nurturing myself, and then being a tool that I could use to nurture others. And I think there's such beautiful work and opportunity for so many for their garden to become, a sustainable, profitable business. And in the same breath, I guess I wish I could go back and give myself that gift to say, it's okay, it's enough for it to be just for you and just to share. It doesn't have to be a place where you go to hustle. It can be a place where you go to heal. And I love that there is this actual formal title and role and mission around that work that you're doing to help people be able to step out of perceive, whether it's self-imposed or, culturally imposed, like pressure for the garden to become something more than what you just need it to be for yourself.
Yeah, that completely resonates with me as well. I don't think you're unique the way you describe that. And I don't know why. I've thought about this from a million different angles. People say this a lot about a certain age group, that everyone's taking their side hobby and making it a hustle instead of just enjoying it. I don't know why I felt sort of inclined to do the same thing, because it started from a place of, I want to share these blooms with everyone. But then it also was sort of this perspective of, if I'm spending so much time out here, I better have something to show for it. And I don't know why. I don't know why. Maybe because, I'm a mother and it felt indulgent in some ways to just be out there and feel so good. And why does that feel like there has to be some end result? Can't just being out there be the thing? So I think that's what I really like about this idea of therapeutic horticulture. One of the things is, constantly figuring out what's a realistic goal for somebody. What are the tools we can give to somebody if they, have difficulty reaching their arms or moving, or something as simple as they don't have a lot of time, but they really want to garden. Then just a pot with a few flowers in it is plenty, and there's nothing to feel bad about. You can be a gardener with one pot. It doesn't have to be rows and rows of blooms. I always say, too, you can just have the heart of a gardener. You can appreciate the natural world and love looking at gardens and experiencing flowers, and perhaps not even having a garden yourself. So there's so many ways to be a gardener. And I'm glad you brought up this whole thing, because I felt it so deeply of, if I'm going to have this garden, if I'm going to spend so much time out there, I better have something to show for what I've done.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it's just wild to have this conversation, because that was very much, I look back and I think in some ways, how they say that you create things that are the solution to the problem that you have, or they're the thing that you wish somebody would have given you. And I wish, when I was, just really digging into gardening and at home with my two little boys at that point, I wished growing kindness had existed. Like I wanted to feel this sense of purpose with what I was doing. Like I wanted my garden to have purpose and be important. And almost in a way, like you said, it's almost like I couldn't just justify that, like, this is my time, this is my space. And just for the fact that it makes me really happy, that's enough. But I wanted it to have purpose beyond even that. And I wish I would have had growing kindness at that point to say that you can use your garden as this really important, meaningful tool in helping others and helping yourself. But I think there is that sense that maybe as moms and as women, this like feeling of like, I can't take away from, like my family's income by investing, like it feels like an extravagant expense, to buy seeds or buy tubers. Well, tubers are always an extravagant expense, but it felt maybe indulgent instead of, it felt justified and important and meaningful. And I feel like I don't have maybe the words to have the answer for that yet, but just maybe if someone's listening today and sitting in this conversation for themselves as well, knowing that they aren't the only ones trying to kind of needle apart those threads of why we do what we do and what we want our gardens to be for us and what they become. And then how do we bring that back to the place of it being a place of healing? And I think the most kind of eye-opening moment for me, I was talking with someone who was a very avid gardener, and she had been through some significant losses. And she said, the garden is the place where I go to heal. And this was several years into me, my garden becoming like a side hustle. And I just remember it was kind of a mic drop moment for me because I realized my garden is a place where I go to hustle now. And I wanted that back. And so for me, that looked like stepping back from the business model I was in and actually kind of shifting away from that. Not to say that that's the answer for, perhaps anybody else, but for me, it was like I needed to go back to the garden being the place where I could use that for my own rest and healing and calm and quiet and not feeling like it was just like one more thing to have to perform in and to improve in.
Completely. Yeah. And that's how the garden started for me too. It was this place. I almost think, especially with both of us understanding this as we were both mothers with young children at the time, it was a spot I could trick myself into self-care that everything else felt like, something else, like a yoga class. I know this sounds silly, but like the idea of like, okay, on a Saturday morning, I'm going to get up, I'm going to leave my family, I'm going to be away for an hour and a half. I completely understood it was important for me because I felt good after and it made me a better mom. But something about, I'm just going out into the garden and feeling like I was beautifying the home or growing flowers for so-and-so's birthday, or it was almost like I tricked myself into thinking it wasn't truly self-care, even though it was.
Mm-hmm.
It was
like that was the permission slip that we needed to give ourselves.
Yeah.
You can do this. It's okay.
Yeah.
I love that so
I
much.
remember probably, what a really interesting thing for me would be when the kids started waking up and running out into the garden to meet me in the morning, and what a better headspace I was in if I had spent a half hour or 45 minutes quiet in the day, getting my strength and my, sipping my coffee slowly. And I thought, how magical for them as well that they'll remember summer mornings waking up and running out barefoot into the garden. So it benefited all of us. Definitely. And again, those were the years I was, for a few years, I was growing lots and lots of flowers and doing CSAs and selling them to florists directly. And so it was still fun, but there was definitely the pressure of, oh gosh, are these Lysianthus going to open for that wedding and things like that. So that's part of why I've stepped back a little from that production as well, for the same reasons you're talking, that I enjoy experimenting with flowers, explaining to people how I've grown them, and showing them the magic and simplicity of creating a home garden for beauty's sake, and how easy it can be.
Absolutely. And I think I just want to hit on what you shared about that piece of when we take care of ourselves, it puts us in a place to be better able to take care of those around us. And I think that is one of the most beautiful and impactful things that happens in the process and act of gardening is we've gone out and filled our own cup, and then we can pour out to others. And I think that growing flowers is such a even more impactful way to put that into practice, because that going out and nurturing the garden, then we're rewarded with these beautiful blooms that then we can actually tangibly, use as a tool to reach out and care for others. And so I guess maybe this conversation, I love that the way our conversations just unfold as they're supposed to, because I think really these topics are something that we don't really talk about enough, and are so important, but that piece of that taking care of ourselves enables us to take better care of others. It's not a self-indulgence. It really is so important. And I just think that work that you're doing as a therapeutic horticulturist to help bring people back, to those key questions about why they're gardening and what they need their garden to be, can create such a powerful shift in how we move forward in our garden. So it's really interesting and empowering to get to hear about that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are afraid to garden if they haven't in a while. And many of the cut flowers that we talk about are pretty easy to grow. And if you buy a packet of seeds and you put 4 seeds in a pot and they don't germinate, just put 4 more in. It is a really affordable and stress-free way to start versus, sometimes you buy a perennial or a shrub and those can be quite expensive. And that was sort of how I started with annuals because I thought, okay, if this all goes horribly wrong, it's been my time and maybe $20, and so I think if anyone is listening and they haven't gardened, they just love the idea of gardening, know that, zinnias, cosmos, dahlias, again, these are like the 3 big heavy hitters that are pretty easy to grow in any climate and very forgiving. And that the trick to gardening, I always think, is just observing what's in front of you, which again is really beneficial to your mental health. If you take the time every morning to step outside, take a deep breath of fresh air and observe your plants, it really settles you and you begin to know them and take better care of them. They become your little children. I have conversations with my flowers all the time.
Isn't it so beautiful, though? Because I think sometimes we think, I don't need one more thing to take care of. I think that's what I hear people say, like, I don't want a houseplant. Like, I don't need one more thing to take care of. And yet the beauty of it is that taking care of it takes care of ourselves. Like, it gives back so much more. And I think that's why it's just such a powerful tool for our own well-being. I would love to hear more. The work that you're doing now is helping people be able to create gardens that meet them where they are and where they want to be. What's your advice for someone, aside from get a pot and put a few seeds in and just go for it? What other advice would you have for someone who's listening who may be either considering starting their first garden or is in those first years where things are just, there's so much trial and error? What are some of the mistakes that you see beginning gardeners make that you would love to keep them from?
So I think a few things. I really, in a big portion of the beginning of my book, is finding inspiration for your garden, creating a garden that is really unique to you and heart-centric to you. And that might look like finding a flower that reminds you of someone, or finding a flower that when you smell it, you think of a particular time or a happy occasion, looking at works of art you enjoy and pulling out colors that speak to you, or closing your eyes and thinking of your grandmother's garden and what was she growing. Creating a list of those flowers and letting that inspire and excite you and not get so held or bogged down by how am I going to plant it? Do I have sun? Do I have shade? All those really sort of unromantic elements of gardening that can sort of make you lose your steam. Really sort of soak into the inspirational beauty of a garden. And then I think the hardest part, if you've never gardened before, narrow down your list just to 5 flowers. Probably, if I was going to go back in time, I'd probably pick 3, truly, because by looking and observing those flowers up close, like I mentioned before, by taking the time every morning, pressing your thumb into the soil, seeing if it's too dry or too moist, or rubbing your fingers along the leaves and seeing if they're wilting at all, you will, within a season, become an expert on that flower and you will grow it beautifully for decades to come. But the number one mistake I made was going into a greenhouse without a plan, filling up my cart with a million things that looked pretty, getting home and saying, oh no, where do I plant this all? Then, looking around and saying, oh, I forgot to finish planting those. Then it's sitting out in this black, container waiting to be planted and me feeling guilty and then getting so overwhelmed and saying, I don't have time for any of this. So I think sometimes, especially, we sort of go overboard the first few years and get really excited about all different types of flowers and probably buy too much and cut too much off, put too much on our plate. So really being honest with yourself about what would make you happy to see in your garden, focusing on 3 to 5 flowers and being realistic too about the time you have. It's okay if you only have 5 minutes a day to tend to a garden. That'll work, but maybe don't go beyond a couple of pots on your doorstep. Or if you have more like a half hour every day, a raised 3x6 bed. If you have hours and hours to give, maybe dip in a little bit more than that. But just be really realistic with yourself about where you can start, and don't feel bad that that's where you can start, because just beginning is an amazing step.
I love that advice so much. I know that I share this quote probably ad nauseum. I honestly don't know if there's been an episode yet where I haven't shared it, but I just think it's so applicable. But Arthur Ashe said, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. And I think so many times we take things that are joyful and life-giving and we turn them into something that actually is it's draining and overwhelming, because we jump in a way that requires so much more than we actually have to give, whether that's time or resources. And there's all the benefits, like you said, all the benefits of gardening are ours, even from a single flower pot. And even all the joy of giving flowers are ours and accessible. You can give one single, bloom at a time and just give single stems all season long and get to enter into that joy and connection that happens in giving flowers. And it's joyful instead of overwhelming. So I really, really love, again, I needed your book 20 years ago, because I think we tend to, look around and look at all these people who are doing this really well, but they may be doing it in a different way. And, we'll hear all the advice and wisdom about, grow X amount of focal flowers and X amount of filler flowers and grow this and grow that. And that's great if your intention is that you need to produce X amount of bouquets for a market. But if your garden just needs to be the space where you're finding joy, start with 3 to 5. Like it's so simple. And I think it can profoundly change people's experience, especially if they haven't gardened yet, so that it keeps it joyful and not overwhelming to just start so simply. So thank you for that advice. I hope that lots of people hearing this today, that saves them from maybe some of the overwhelm that you and I both had to experience as growing gardeners ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the same with even more experienced gardeners who are maybe looking to add more native plants, right? Like we all know native plants are better for the planet. We know that. But it can be really overwhelming if you look at your garden and think, is this a native? Is this a cultivar? What's happening? Same thing. Just pick one plant. Just research one truly native plant and just start there. And then who knows, maybe in 5 years, you'll have this incredible, completely only native plant garden. But I think same thing, the more pressure we put on ourselves for our garden to be a certain way, which obviously is so reflective of sometimes how we can treat ourselves and in our day-to-day life, like let it be this place to just be so easy on yourself. And the magic is that Mother Nature will just take care of the rest. And you can just kick your feet up and smell the flowers, quite literally.
Yes. Amen to that. Oh my goodness. Yes, 100%. Like I said, this is the conversation that I wish would have been in the world for me even 20 years ago. And I hope that it's a help to someone who may be in these beginning stages as well. I did not anticipate our conversation going this way, but
I feel like I did. Knowing you,
I'm like maybe I needed this personally for me to just know, like so many of us, I think, sit in that place where we put so much pressure on.
Oh yeah,
the guard. Like we've got to perform. It's got to be another thing that we do well instead of just letting it be. What a lesson to us.
Yeah, maybe it won't go well, and that's okay. Right? Because I always think in other parts of your life, like, especially with parenting, we want to do our best with that all the time. And that is a huge stress. If I make a big parenting mistake, that weighs heavily on me, and everyone does. If I make a mistake and my scabiosa don't come up, it's not that big of a deal. It's not. How beautiful a garden can be, even when you make really poor mistakes, that is always magic to me as well.
Yeah, I cannot agree more. I would love for people to get to continue to hear your voice and hear this perspective. I think it's so important in the gardening world right now. What are the ways that people can continue learning from you or dig in even to some of the wisdom that you've shared in your book?
So obviously, you could get a copy of the book, which is sold wherever books are sold, and it is called The Beginner's Cut Flower Garden by me, Elizabeth Brown, published through the wonderful Timber Press. So I always like to plug local bookstores because I like local flowers, I like local food, I like local shopping. Of course, you can buy the book online, and that's very easy. But also, if you have a local bookstore, oftentimes they will special order it for you really quickly. So you can buy it wherever books are sold. And through that, part of the reason I created that book was based on the conversation we're having right now, that so many books I was reading were so heavily based on production, and for me, lost that magical, spiritual, healing feeling in a garden. So I was looking for the balance of how to grow flowers, but also how to really sink into how good it made me feel. And so that's where the book comes from. And also I have a website, foxlovefarmhouse.com. On there, I have a video series, which is a lot of me just walking through my garden and going through how to start seeds, what are good flowers, how to put irrigation in, sort of a lot of visual heavy things that I go over in the book. And the reason I did that is people learn all different ways. So some people learn best by physically seeing how I'm moving with my hands on things or planting things, whereas other people really like the tactile holding a book and having pages. So I have it in so many different ways because I wholeheartedly believe the world needs more gardeners and that anyone can grow flowers. And so you just have to start simply.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for sharing all that information about how we can get in touch with you. We will also include it in the show notes below, so it makes it really easy for people to get connected with you and the work that you're doing, just helping bring us back to our why and helping bring us back to the tools that our gardens can be for healing ourselves. And then in that and through that, being able to show up in a healthy and whole way for the people around us and be able to give back in our communities, even then through our gardens. So, Elizabeth, thank you so much for being here with us today and reminding us all of the powerful tool that we have right outside our back doors to help us be healthier and more whole and more able to take care of those who are around us. As we close the podcast today, I would love to hear from you. What is one small act of kindness that someone once shared with you that stays with you still today?
Oh, that's such a great question. You know, I think I'd have to say that, like so many of us, the moment you said that, I thought of my grandmother who had this really beautiful garden. And not only did she grow flowers, but she painted from it. And I had two incredible grandmothers, actually, and both of them at various times, brought me into their garden and showed me their craft, whether it be painting or gardening. And I always think of them when I'm gardening because they were mothers. They were humble people. They were beautiful souls. And their hearts just lit up in the garden. And when I'm in the garden, I feel that I'm with them. And so I'm grateful that they showed me this path all those years ago.
Thank you so much for listening to the Growing Kindness podcast. If today's episode encouraged you, there are a few simple ways to keep growing kindness with us. First, you can join the team. When you become a Growing Kindness gardener, you link arms with like-minded, like-hearted people from all around the world who believe that small acts of kindness really do make a big difference. To learn more or join the team, visit growingkindnessproject.org/gardener. Thanks to the generosity of our donors, membership is free. Another way to get involved is to become a donor. The Growing Kindness movement and this, our podcast, are made possible by the generosity of our donors, kind-hearted people who believe, just like you, kindness matters. If you'd like to support the movement, visit growingkindnessproject.org/donate to make a gift and keep kindness blooming. And finally, if this episode touched your heart, would you share it with a friend? It's one of the simplest ways to spread kindness today. I'm so grateful you're here. Until next time, keep growing kindness, one bloom at a time. This podcast is made possible in part by Her Connection Hub, a female-focused co-working space in Bellingham, Washington, who generously provides the studio space where these conversations are recorded.